Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Daniel Prude, and now the latest victim, Jonathan Price. We grieve so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. As this list continues to grow, MOAD will continue to say their names, as our commitment to honoring the victims and to attaining true racial justice is unwavering. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose land we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you today to MOAD Online and to our series Conversations Across the Diaspora with Sarah Ladipo Manyika, occurring monthly with guests from all over the globe. Some you may know and recognize, and some you may not, but all will bring a new perspective to the African diaspora. I want to acknowledge Peggy Woodford Forbes for helping to support this series, and thank everyone here today who's joined us, with special appreciation for those who have donated to the museum during this pandemic. We would not be able to produce this programming without your support. Today, we're thrilled to be presenting a conversation with civic leader, educator, and broadcaster, Lord Michael Hastings. Our host, Sarah Ladipo Manyika, was raised in Nigeria and has lived in Kenya, France, Zimbabwe, and England. Sarah is a novelist, short story writer, and essayist, and founding books editor for Aussie.com. Her debut novel, Independence, is an international bestseller, while her second novel, Like a Mule Bringing Ice Cream to the Sun, has been translated into a number of languages. Her nonfiction includes personal essays and intimate profiles of people she meets, from Mrs. Harris to Pastor Evan Mawarire, to Toni Morrison and Michelle Obama. Sarah's previously served on MOAD's board and currently serves as board director for the Women's Writing Residency, Hedgebrook. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Ladipo Manyika.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone in the audience and who's watching on different platforms. It's great to have you. And welcome to the next episode, as it were, of Conversations Across the African Diaspora, where we celebrate the African diaspora in its rich diversity. And who better to speak to than Lord Michael Hastings?
Hello.
Lord, hello and welcome. And I'm not going to let you get away without me giving you a proper introduction, which is to give a full bio for those who don't know about all the amazing things you've done. Lord Michael Hastings was born in the UK, lived in Jamaica, and was educated in Northwest England. Lord Hastings began his career as a teacher, moving into government service in 1986, where he worked on policy and delivered active implementation on bringing employment and development to Britain's inner cities, after 2 rounds of violent race riots. He led policy and communications for the Commission for Racial Equality and received a CBE in 2003 after 21 years as a trustee building safer communities. Lord Hastings entered broadcasting through educational programming and live presenting, and then as a political correspondent before becoming the BBC's chief lobbyist in 1996. Latterly as its first head of corporate social responsibility in 2003. He subsequently worked for the global accounting firm KPMG as global head of citizenship and global head of diversity until 2019. In 2005, Lord Hastings was conferred with the life peerage and sits as an independent peer in the House of Lords. That same year, he received the UNICEF Award for his outstanding work for effecting positive solutions for African children, or Africa's children rather. He's an annual attendee at the World Economic Forum Davos, taking part in inquiries on migration, talent, and global diversity. In 2014, Lord Hastings was conferred with a doctorate in civil law from the University of Kent, Canterbury, in recognition of his leadership at KPMG, the BBC, and his work in international development and corporate responsibility. In 2017, Lord Hastings was installed as the Chancellor of Regent's University London, and most recently appointed Professor of Leadership at the Stephen R. Covey Institute, University of Utah. And that is just a snippet of the great Lord Hastings bio. But welcome, welcome. It's brilliant to see you again, and just so delighted that you're with us.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Yeah.
So, Michael, we always start with a very basic question these days. How are you, and where are you zooming in from?
Well, I am just outside of London in an area called Hertfordshire. It's near St. Albans, for any of your viewers and listeners who have been around the UK and around London. It's in the countryside, but to get into London is a half an hour train journey. It's an hour in the car. How am I? Abundantly, happily, very well. I have found the period that we've all been struggling with coronavirus and our responses to coronavirus, actually, ironically, somewhat of a beautifully orchestrated, restful time, being very purposeful and engaging. But as mentioned in the introduction, we've also, for any of us who are Black, whether African Americans or Black Brits, we've also had the horrendous pandemic of fury as a result of the horrendous display of mass murders that have gone on, especially in the US, because of police incriminatory and discriminatory shootings. So, you've got the pandemic of disease, you've got the fear that comes from it, and you've got the pandemic of fury. And I have to admit, Sarah, I've really found it emotionally difficult, because you look out on far too many decades of unresolved anguish, and it has beat hard in my heart. Yeah.
Mm. The last time we spoke, which was about a week ago, and I asked you how you were, you said, in addition to what you've just said, you talked about being in a state of irritated anxiety, and you were highlighting some of the issues we have with leadership around the world. And I wonder if you still have that sense, and if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, irritated anxiety, because certainly I know I'm considerably older than you, Sarah, but I grew up in a period of time, the 1960s, the 70s, 80s, where we iconized leadership. We really expected so much from presidents and prime ministers, and we expected that there was not just tone setting for nations, as in their own nation, but there was such a duty that went beyond the well-off world into the less well-off world. I'm old enough to remember when we used to talk of China as just, oh, those people over there who all wear blue boiler suits and ride bicycles. And that was our image. And now this superpower looms in front of our faces on a day-to-day basis. So the world has changed so rapidly, and it's kind of ironic that, it was President Xi at Davos. You referred to my 13 years of going to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, and to see the president of China just a few years ago being the tone setter, the one who gave the seminal thought on the state of the world, was very strange, but uplifting and positive. I'm a great fan of Angela Merkel. I think she has to be the most outstanding political leader in the democratic world on the planet. And I read this profile of her just last week, which talks about this woman who goes shopping with her husband on a Saturday and pays her own bills and doesn't have a government car and lives, simply and purely. And somebody came up to her and said to her, Mrs. Merkel, I took a photograph of you in that dress a few years ago. And she said, yes, precisely. I have a duty to serve the German people, not to be a model. And there are still strong people in our democratic world that we can respect and we can adhere to. But your country in the US, our country in the UK, we've let go of too much that was what we once thought was the heritage we wanted to show off to the countries of Africa, the countries of the Caribbean, the countries of Asia. Look, come and follow the lead of our democratic systems. And we've seen presidents and yes, potential presidents squabbling like children and cats in a sack, and abusive rudeness and demeaning illogicality, and even prime ministers who wish to break international law in order to make political points. We're in a sour place. So yes, I do have great anguish, and part of my duty in Parliament is to make sure that I vote and I speak on the things that matter deeply. And one of the things I was really glad this week that I could vote on and vote positively on was a motion we brought forward in the House of Lords to ensure that people who are trafficked across Europe through Europe's non-boundaryness into the UK are not just thrown back because they've now come from the EU into the UK. We have a duty to protect those who are trafficked, to look after them, to see them as migrants who need probably refugee status. So the House of Lords took that on as a matter of honor. And I was glad that we won that vote. But we got to stand up for the dignity of the oppressed. And I wish leaders really believed that. That's what makes me anguish, Sarah.
And particularly so because you have stood up for the dignity of the oppressed for your whole life. And it's one of the things that I really admire about what you have done in the course of your life, which is wonderful. I was going to come to the House of Lords a little bit later, but you've raised it, so let's just jump right in. I think this is the first time that we've had the pleasure of, at MOAD, speaking to a Lord. Tell us a little bit, for those who don't know, a little bit about the House of Lords and its role in British government, and what your role is as a House of Lord, as a Lord, and how many Black Lords are there?
Oh gosh. Well, and I'm glad you. I don't look to many, especially to many of your American viewers. I don't look very lordly at the moment because I'm at home. I'm in a Nelson Mandela print shirt. I have 6 of these of the different colors that Nelson Mandela would wear. It all funds a charity, the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital in Johannesburg. So I'm proud to buy them, proud to wear them. And I had the joy to meet him twice when he came through the UK. And, remembering, I will never forget this one thing that he said as an iconic leader to a group of us, which was, the purpose of life is to plant trees in whose shade another generation will sit. And I have carried that with me always, because that is to invest in the long life of the next community. So the House of Lords, well, we are a great ancient institution, far older than America, as it were, as in its current state of life. The House of Lords was there before 1776, and it was kind of there before 1619, depending on which view of history you choose to take at the moment. I'm on the 1619. But the House of Lords is a parliament appointed by Her Majesty the Queen. So we have a bicameral system. Much as in the United States, you have the House of Representatives and, of course, the Senate, modeled on the House of Commons, the House of Lords. The difference is that senators have to go out every, I think it's 6 years, and get re-elected. We never have to go out in the House of Lords and get elected because we're appointed by the sovereign, Her Majesty the Queen. She makes the decisions and appointments. Yes, there are around about 800 in total, second largest chamber in the world after China. But never mind, because 800 members don't attend. It's around about 450 a week on average who attend, because it is not a job. It is an honor and a responsibility. The members who choose to take on the mantle of a baron or a baroness, who become a lord at Her Majesty's command, we are gifted with the duty to uphold the Constitution, which is invested in the monarchy and the rule of law. We don't have constituents, so elected members in the House of Commons have constituents, and they must deal with constituents' business. We have constitutional business, which involves making sure that law is properly scrutinized, is clear-sighted, that gaps are not missed, like that one over traffic migrants, which was missed in the House of Commons. We take it up in the House of Lords, and sometimes these things cause conflict between the two chambers, but that's what you have in the American system. There's meant to be the pursuit of intelligence, insight, wisdom, and dignity. That's our job. And if that means voting against what the Democratic House votes against, they can forcibly turn us over if they want, but good argument is important. So the role of the House is to defend what is good about law, uphold the Constitution, protect the public interest, and to represent the monarch.
Mm. So you are part of the establishment, but don't come from that.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions that we like to ask our guests is to tell us about your connection to the African diaspora. And I've been dying to ask you this question. I know a little bit, we've spoken before, but tell us about your family background and the rich cultural heritage that you come from.
Well, it's many layers. So
and just going to interrupt
I'll tell you what I know.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Elizabeth, are you getting feedback on the audio?
Yeah, a little bit. Okay,
so we'll just, if it gets really bad, Lord Hastings, we will wave a magic wand, but do continue.
Okay. Hope it's not coming from me. So in terms of the complexities of my background, my dear father, who died in 1976, was born in Angola. His parents had been missionaries. I understand it, they had come from Middle India. They were missionaries in a medical sense and then also in the spiritual sense. So they built a clinic, they built a school, they built a hospital, and they built a church. And I have amazing pictures of my grandfather's work. Of course, I never met him. He was long dead before ever I was around. And I did meet my grandmother, but when I did meet my grandmother, she was unfortunately senile and not able to really speak to us. So we didn't gain anything from that experience in terms of history and knowledge. My father was then sent, as was his brother and his sister, from Angola, from Luanda, all the way to England to go to school in Somerset, where they attended school, and then they went on to Edinburgh University. All three of them did medicine. My aunt became a general practitioner, my uncle became a surgeon, and my father became a dental surgeon. And then he chose to go to Jamaica to practice dental surgery. There were a lot of Indians who had gone to, not so much Angolans, but a lot of Indians had set up shop, as it were, in the West Indies. And so that's where he went to a little town called Sablamar. And in the process of looking down my mother's throat, fell in love with whatever was down her throat. I mean, he was a dental.
I've never heard that one before.
My mother tells the story. Well, she died in 2010, but she used to tell the story of, your dad just constantly wanted to fix my teeth. What did he see about her? I don't know, but there we go. It is what it is. But she had a mixed background. Her father was from Panama, and her mother was of a Ghanaian heritage. So although she was obviously living in Jamaica, so I got mixes everywhere, and I'm happy to say I feel like a true Pan-African in the fullest sense of the word.
You absolutely are. Spanning Europe, America, the Caribbean, Africa. It's you couldn't be more Pan-African, I don't think. So that's fantastic. Let me go back a little bit to earlier on in your career when you worked in government service and brought employment and development or very instrumental in bringing employment and development to Britain's inner cities. And this was around the time of 2 rounds of violent race riots. And I'm thinking back, I think that's sort of Brixton and Toxteth, but there were other riots, I think, at the same time. Take us back to that time and tell us a little bit about what was going on and some of the things that you did.
Well, 1981 and 1985, there were 2 really uncomfortable, long week, many week lasting rounds of urban riots. 21 UK cities, many parts of London, different boroughs and parts of London went up in flames. 21 cities, parts of Liverpool, parts of Manchester, parts of Birmingham, many parts of London, parts of Bristol, parts of Newcastle. It was all over the country. And in essence, what it was long held Black anguish and over unemployment and over racial disparity. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister at the time. The UK absolutely needed to go through an industrial revolution, a modernization. There had to be a significant amount of privatization of state-controlled business. The UK was bringing in coal from Europe, from Eastern Europe, and not able to afford the coal produced in the UK because the pricing was so cheap. So there was this huge industrial upheaval going on. And the difficulty of any form of political and economic change is it creates too many victims, sadly. And Black people really did suffer that displaced pain. Too many lost jobs without hope and futures. And just a sense of anguish at a lack of racial freedom boiled over into the streets. And once it set off, it calmed it. In 1985, it was all back again. And then there was this incredible fear it was all going to happen in 1986. And it was at that point that I had a phone call. And I was sitting at home. I was a school teacher. It was spring break, as you might say in the United States. It was half term, as you might say here. In those days, phones sat on desks or walls. Remember those, Sarah? We used to do all this. That's what phones were like. And there was I sitting at a desk, and the phone rang, and it was one of Margaret Thatcher's chief advisors. And I had spoken to this man, but 6 years earlier. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. And he rang up to say that I needed to come in. And the Prime Minister needed a job done. So I did. I was appointed as a consultant to work with the government and to work with the Department of Employment and to get around the communities. And as I got around communities, I was building bridges between many broken, Black, hurting leadership, many coming from faith communities, from churches, many others who were just community activists. They had long given up on the dream that they might matter. And my job was to show them they mattered. And then to build these relationship bridges with government agents, civil servants who had money. But having the money and not having the relationship doesn't get you very far, because there has to be trust built between broken and angry communities. And so that was my job. I traversed the country for 5 years. It was wonderful, able to generate ideas, able to get the money out of the system, invest in employment and development schemes, and many of which are still standing now. I drove past one just the other day, and I'm just thrilled at the opportunity that we had to broker a peace based on good relationships and the guts that the Thatcher leadership had to say, look, come on, let's just face reality. We might have the money, but we don't have the context. Let's bring in someone who's got the context.
So building good relationships and establishing trust are just like a thread that go through all of your work, I think. I wanted to just go back, and we've touched on this in different ways, to this business about Black Lives Mattering. So I have heard over the past months from a fair number of friends in Europe and in London who've been watching what's happening in the States and being appalled by what they're seeing in the States, but almost at the same time congratulating themselves at how good things are in Europe and in Britain. Where are we, do you think? I mean, you worked on so many of these issues and problems and challenges in the 80s and have continued to. So what would you say to someone who says, we're all right?
I'd say don't be naive. I'm sure many people don't know that although the UK does count ethnic diversity figures, you won't get that in France or Germany. It's almost as though everybody is monochronally accepted to be the same. So we can map diversity disparities here, we can map inequalities here, but that's not the case across Europe. And I have to say, the EU has been just inadequate on that one. There is really no emphasis in the EU on racial justice, and that's a shocking indictment of such an expensive and major political institution, that it doesn't take this with the seriousness that it deserves. Britain is not, the United Kingdom is not where the US is. The US has a kind of ingrained institutional racism, which is extreme, and it manifests itself in particular in the US, if you don't mind me saying so, Sarah, as a non-American. But I'm a pretty good reader, and my brother's an American living in Boston, so I know it, I get it, I understand it, and I see it. And Time magazine reported, and they use this phrase: America solves its race problems through incarceration and police brutality. And that has been the messy, uncomfortable story since the 1950s, where it's been blatantly obvious. Of course, before that, you were talking about periods of complete racial disengagement, and then you go back into the slavery period before that. Now, in the UK, the law provides for genuine Black people can vote the same as anybody else can vote. You don't have these kind of voter delaying tactics which are going on across the US now. You don't have the militias which you have in the US. However, that said, if you are Black, a young Black man in Britain, you're 10 times more likely to be stopped by police authorities. And these are government figures. I haven't made these up. You're 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched by government, by police authorities. They are going to make some assumption that because you're a young Black and male and probably driving a car they think you shouldn't drive, or just looking a little bit different, that you're either a drug trader or you're carrying a weapon. Now, that results in a searching process, which, according to the UK Home Office's own figures, 2019, 83% of stops and searches result in no questionable behavior and no further action. In which case, tens of thousands of young Black men have been made angry and wounded, and in some cases, assaulted. And we do have our cases here of where police brutality has led to deaths. It was just an example on the news here today. So, and this is referring to a case from some years back where a ruling has been brought forward. We do have our cases that they're not at the percentage levels they are in the US, but anyone is unacceptable. Anyone's unacceptable. We have too many incidences where disadvantage and inability to get work. I mean, this is uncomfortable truth, Sarah, that because this has been tried, if a young person with a complex African name submits a CV, it is highly likely, certainly before the killing of George Floyd, things have changed a bit, highly likely they may not get an interview. If the same person with the same CV submits the application with a European name, they get an interview. Now that's what you call deliberate but almost hidden racism, because it's based on a set of assumptions. We do have that in torrents. And we have uncomfortable figures where if you're a Black person standing before a court and a white person is charged with the same crime and it's the same trial, the Black person will get a sentence 4 times longer than the white person.
I mean, all these statistics are very damning, and they paint the picture. I mean, I remember living in London in the 1990s, and so many of my Nigerian friends, for employment purposes, changing their names when they say, they come the equivalent of Joe Bloggs rather than, Tunde so-and-so or something. So it's, and we have a long way to go in England. And as you say, figures may be even more alarming in America, but we're certainly not aiming to reach the American figures.
No, I mean, what I would say in addition to that is that what the Black Lives Matter movement did from the US to the UK was to make the world around Black people understand it is still possible in 2020 to watch a man die live on television by an act of determined murderous violence. And that's a police doing that, and 3 others watching. Now, I'm sure you know that that particular policeman was released on bail 2 days ago, at a bail of $1 million. Somehow he managed to find $1 million to come out. Meanwhile, the family of George Floyd is still in trauma. And this is the disparity of injustice, which is so extremely unacceptable. Mm. And we have too many cases. I just finished this point. We have too many cases here which really bother me, of miscarriages of justice. I do a lot of work in prisons, and I meet so many Black prisoners who, when I go through their case files, I cannot see how this man has ended up on a life charge. But what I see is a series of connected incidentals, which, if presented without proper representation and good legal authority, incriminate. Now, that is not justice.
Well, you've actually just picked up where I was going, because I was going to talk about the criminal justice system. If anyone Googles you and sort of Googles your name in House of Lords, they'll see some fantastic pictures. You're with Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan, but also Brian Stevenson.
Yes.
All of you very dapper looking in these pictures. But Brian Stevenson, of course, has devoted his whole life to fighting injustices within the US criminal justice system. And on top of everything else that you do, as you just mentioned, you've been very active around prison work and criminal justice system in England as well. And in addition, so I'm also just watching the time. The time flies by so quickly, but I think I have time to just squeeze in a few more questions. You know, another side of you has been, as I mentioned in the introduction, you worked for the BBC, and for a time where you served as the head of corporate social responsibility. And I just wanted to ask you about, you know, what does that mean, and what does that look like for businesses? Are businesses doing enough? And mattering perhaps about Black lives is probably, you know, finds its way into this as well. So I wonder if you can speak to us on that area for a moment or two.
Well, I was really proud to be the first head of corporate social responsibility for the BBC, and I carried that mantle into KPMG, where we changed the title to Global Head of Citizenship, because what I wanted KPMG, a brilliant professional service institution, to recognize was that this stuff shouldn't be about a little bit of volunteering and a little bit of money and some good philanthropy and a few nice pictures and some smiles. This stuff should be about the business accepting its duty as a citizen. You know, Barack Obama, when he laid the first stone on the Obama Center in Chicago, said that, you know, the most important role any of us can have in life is not to be president or prime minister, king or queen, chief executive or chairman, but it is to be a citizen. And I really believe that as individuals must be citizens and therefore effective and caring and committed neighbors and involved in the quality of the communities in which they live and serving the institutions to build those communities, so must companies. Because after all, companies and institutions of public life draw their life from the citizens. They draw their income from the citizens, either directly or by default. So I wanted KPMG to be a citizen. I wanted the BBC to be a citizen. And, you know, the wonderful thing is they wanted to be as well. And I'm proud of the fact that the BBC put so much effort into supporting children through its Children in Need annual fundraising program, and supporting comic relief through the gifting of airtime to enable vast amounts of money to be raised to fulfill the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to carry programming that draws out the disorder and distress of society, but then provides solutions. And, you know, for the BBC, proud of someone like David Olusoga's great series on Black Britons before slavery. And if anybody watching hasn't seen it, get to it. You can get to it via the BBC iPlayer system and get to it. Have a look at it and see it. You know, there's going to be a new series starting actually on Sunday as well with Samuel Jackson, which is of course a joint BBC American television production looking at the reality of nature of Black history through centuries, not just because of slavery. So that's how great institutions can take on causes. But when it comes to this area of what some would say is corporate responsibility, I'd call it corporate citizenship. You know, I'd refer your viewers to no better a CEO than Doug McMillon, the CEO of Walmart. And if you go onto the Walmart website, and you can look up a very good short video film that he put out just a few weeks back, which tells the story of Walmart's commitment to environmental sustainability, to low carbon, and now moving towards no carbon presence because of what they do, how they reuse, how they're involved in the circular economy, and Walmart being one of the first employers in America to have a living wage. Now, these are things that business can do to transform people's lives and give them greater economy and freedom. I really believe in that. So I urge every business to look at the Business Roundtable, which is an American institution of over 200 chief executives and leaders of organizations. 2 years ago, under Jamie Dimon's leadership, they took on the commitment to define business as an organization that develops the value of the entire community around it, and it's prioritized by the stakeholder, not just by the shareholder.
That's great. Well, I'll say, if Walmart is listening and other companies, I'll also say that, you know, a good way to get involved and help sort of raise people's voices, and mine is going, is to support your arts institutions. So a little plug there. Michael, I want to, I feel like we're spending like 2 minutes on everything because you cover so much. But another thread that runs through your work is that of an educator. You started off as a teacher, and you are now the chancellor of a university, of Regent's University in London. Can you talk to us about education and the importance of education? And, you know, maybe even thinking about how are educational systems or institutions having to pivot in an ever-changing world, sort of underscored by what's happening around COVID, but even beyond that, a more sort of virtual world. And these are things I suspect you are thinking of as a leader of a great institution, of a university. So education.
A friend of mine put it like this, and he leads many schools, that education needs to be about framing the future, not having a stuck curriculum based on just historicities or the way we used to do it. Now, obviously, what has happened this year because of coronavirus everywhere, schools have been closed and children have been away and learning has been delayed and exams have been prevented. All of a sudden, we're having to think differently about how we evaluate learning, but also how do we develop learning? And, you know, this is the irony of this, Sarah, is here we are talking to each other through a one-dimensional screen, which obviously not everybody in the world has, but frankly, it's around about 60% in the world have these one-dimensional mechanisms for being able to receive so much vast knowledge and insight. And we can pursue relentlessly through the internet to discover it. We can find so many amazing, insightful short films and stories and captivating pieces of information. But yet the irony of all of that is that it hasn't made us a more learning culture. And the having of knowledge is not what causes education. It's the wanting to receive knowledge that causes education. So people need to be focused on what the future will represent. And here's one dimension of the future. I just have to slip this in because the United Nations and the World Economic Forum published some really interesting population figures just 2 weeks ago, which show that the second largest country by population in the world in 2100 is not going to be India or China. It's going to be Nigeria with 791 million people. The continent of Africa with 4 billion people. Now, come on, as the world is changing, so the reality of Black lives will be everywhere. And the need to move away from a monochrome way of thinking into a multidimensional, international way of understanding. The World Economic Forum publishes a set of skills which are necessary for future success, either as an entrepreneur, as a business person, or just somebody interested in leading change in the world. And the number one on the top of those skills, 2022, is being able to have complex, find solutions and think about complex problems. Now, when you think about it, in how many schools do children get pushed to think about complex problems and find solutions? But actually, in an increasingly entrepreneurial and diversifying world, that's exactly what we need. We need to be able to think our way through not just the applications of technology, but how do we make the world work for the different sectors who are going to be either displaced by artificial intelligence or automation or robotics? But what do people do with this innate need to work and the energy that they have? And obviously, for some people, expressions of creativity and art will be natural. For other people, there has to be an increasing release of those gifts towards either caring services or to agriculture or to innovation. You know, I discovered recently that as a result of, ironically, a great cataclysmic event in the early 1800s, we got the bicycle because there was a volcano in Indonesia which caused a massive blackout of the sun for many months, and there were snowfalls in Sydney when there never were, and in New York in summer. And the consequence of this was that people couldn't feed their horses. Because they couldn't feed their horses, a German inventor went and invented the bicycle. And now we have bicycles everywhere. We're so grateful for it. So out of extreme circumstances can come great innovation. We need to remember that. So if learning is about the future, it's about innovation, it's about possibilities, and it's about humanity, and it's about understanding complex things and finding solutions and applying the mind to the full potential of our ability to think emotionally as well as our ability to think cognitively. That's proper education. Now, we can gain so much on curriculum content by television, YouTube, content online, and by good reading. Our structures of education are orientated around things we can pick up now by the internet. So we need to change our learning into discovering how to think, innovate, and apply, looking at complexity, finding solutions, and building humanity.
That's a great, just everything you said is just wonderful. And I love the bicycle example. I didn't know that, just great. I think we need more bicycles actually than ever these days. Time is flying. I'm going to ask you one last question before we move on to just some short, tiny questions. Michael, in this world in which there's so much turmoil, what is it that grounds you?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it's really important. I begin my day every day. I begin my day reading from the scriptures. I believe in Jesus and I follow him. I have done ever since I was 14 years of age, and I made a faith commitment to follow who Jesus is and to know him and to love him and to know the truth of the scriptures. So I read the Bible every morning. That's been my habit since 14, and I will keep going till my last day. And I discover so much to reflect on positively because I'm wanting to hear wisdom. And I love reading many books. I mean, as you mentioned, I am Stephen R. Covey Professor of Leadership. So I do read Stephen's books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm reading The 8th Habit at the moment on greatness. I read one of his son's books recently on the speed of trust. I read a lot of material. I read The Economist. I read Financial Times. I read the Times newspaper. I read Time magazine. I read the New Statesman every week. So I'm keeping my mind vibrant and alert. But I really need that space every morning where I can pull away and find the peace of God and really learn that actually it is in reflecting on the goodness of God that I'm grateful, hugely grateful, in seeking to hear the whispers of God that I'm energized, and as he leads and gives me opportunity, I'm glad to follow. That's how I'm motivated. And then you know what else I'm motivated by? I'm so motivated by people who long to change their lives and put the energy into changing their lives. And if I can serve them in doing that, that is an enormous joy. And that's why I mentioned the work that we do in prisons, because there are people who you'd think you'd give up hope. Oh, no way. They are longing to capture their freedom of mind, if not their freedom of physical reality. So it's a blessing to be with transformative people all the time who give me great encouragement.
Well, you are transformative in chief, I think, in terms of inspiring so many of us. So thank you. I'm going to end with 3 little quick questions that we always ask, because we're running down on time, before we bring in some audience guests. If you could change anything about the way that people think of the African diaspora, what would it be?
It'll take a long time to get that mindset of less adequate than, less capable than, less competent than, less possible than, out of the mind of many Europeans and North Americans. It's too well embedded. But you know, you only get there, you only change your mind when there's a combination of 2 critical things. One is you build relationships with people you reach across the aisle. You literally seek out the other, the different other. I long for that seeking out for people, not just to see people of the African diaspora as great cultural bearers of heritage from another continent, but actually as phenomenally intelligent academics and economists and medical experts and people who are innovators and technicians and creators and drivers of wealth and supporters of community and hospital workers. There's a need to change the narrative. Yes, there is a need to change the narrative. And there is a radical need to embed respect, because when you get to know people who are different of different cultures, you learn to love them. When you learn to love them, all those kind of prejudices just drop away, and you don't need to carry them any longer. And so many people want to look at the African continent and say, oh, it's all washed up, you know, certain people might call it a something whole. And you know, I have traveled and traversed 12 countries across the continent over these many years, and I've seen it from the poorest, most shambolic places right the way through to the most immensely sophisticated, technological and dignified places across the continent. I'm proud to say, you know, there are wonderful countries like Botswana and Rwanda now, which are so strong, Ghana, which is settled and positive, and Kenya, which has now got an effective peace process in place between what were previously disagreeing tribes. You know, and to see the energy and creativity there is across the continent is beautiful. And Africa's people are beautiful. And Africa's culture is beautiful. They're also competent, intelligent, capable, strong, insightful, academic, significant. These are the real words of change I long to see applied to all of us. Now, they all apply to you, Sarah, because you are absolutely 100% the most brilliant example of the African diaspora in practice. We need the wider world out there to give us the time and the dignity to be heard.
You know, as you were going through that list of adjectives and nouns, they all apply to you. And it's just, you know, to see a chancellor, to see a lord, to see someone who has done all that you have done is just so inspirational. And your generosity of heart and spirit is just tremendous. So thank you. Because this is a museum of the African diaspora, we also just like to ask questions about art, and it's obvious from your background that art is very important to you. So just 2 questions about who is your favorite artist from the African diaspora, and also who is the most underappreciated artist from the African diaspora. Impossible questions because you could give 1,000 answers, but we ask it anyway.
Well, you know something, I have so much, as you can see, some of it, so much art, all from Africa across my house. And you know, I'm going to be honest and say, actually, the people who gift me this art, some of which I've bought, of course, but so many have come as wonderful gifts. You could probably see the cow in the background just over my shoulder, and that was to support someone from Somalia to be able to get married. So they had to actually provide a bride price, and so there is a Somalian cow, and I'm glad that that was painted in Somalia for me and sent here. And so much of it, I recently received just last week a beautiful piece of art which was done by a wonderful British artist called Joseph, and very happy to give his link to anyone. He's a phenomenal painter at the Chelsea School of Fine Art at the moment. So I'm actually celebrating unknown people who do stunning work.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do we know Joseph's last name?
Oh, well now yeah, I want to make sure I get it right, so I'm just gonna I'm gonna get it right.
Okay, so while you look for that, we are going to.
That's IJOYEMI.
IJOYEMI. So maybe Elizabeth can put that in the chat for all of us. This has just been so delightful and as always just too short. But we always, for those who have followed the series, we always have 3 or 2 fabulous guests that we pull up from the audience, and we're going to do that to ask you more questions. We also have 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and if we have time, I promise we will try and get to those questions. And Michael, I'm so glad that you brought up the word citizen and the importance of citizenship, because those who are coming up I think of them in terms of just how important community, both locally and nationally, are to them. So we have 3 fabulous guests. We have Kendall Laidlaw, who is here in the States from the Bay Area, and she works for a nonprofit currently, the Episcopal Impact Fund, and manages programs and grants for them. And I won't go on about each person because otherwise we'll run out of time, but just a wonderful person to have as a guest. And then we have Pastor Evan Mawarire, who I've been privileged enough to meet and to write about, and he was a man of great courage and leadership who's speaking truth to power basically started an incredible citizens movement for change in Zimbabwe. And then we have Jacob Cory, who I have just forced to come on because he happened to be in your house at the time that we logged on. And he is based in Britain, obviously, and works in the financial services as a management consultant, and has been very touched by all that you do. So without further ado, and I'm just going to ask all the guests to stay muted until you come on, just because we've had a little bit of audio issues. But let's start with Kendall Laidlaw.
Well, first of all, thank you, Lord Hastings. It's been really enjoyable listening to the conversation with Sarah. I love that I have a list of things to read, watch, and think about. And one of the things there's so many things that I want to ask you, but one of the things is, when did you know what was your life purpose? I mean, you have history, you have education, knowledge as a journalist, all these things you seem to have brought together. And I know that, finding your life purpose is not an easy thing for a lot of people. And when did you know what direction you were going to go in, or are you still discovering that?
Oh. I'm terribly late at 62 if I was still trying to discover. But the truth is, Kendall, I was asked by my best friend at school, my close friend at school, when I was 16 years old. That's a long time ago. And I remember when he said to me, Michael, what are you going to do with your life? Now, I don't know how many 16-year-olds generally ask that question, but I was glad that I was asked that question. And I responded, I want to speak for the poor, and I want to bend the power of the prosperous to the potential of the poor. And it meant something deep to me at the time, because I had witnessed the complete breakdown of Jamaica's economy and its civil society in the early 1970s. And I'd seen how what was a prosperous and peaceful country turned into a poor and desperate and violent country. And the sadness of seeing it, but also realizing I had to take this burden on somehow, and I wanted to. So to fight for the causes of the poor, that has been my driving force.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kendall. That's such a great question. Let's move to Pastor Evan. Welcome. So great to have you.
Sarah, thank you so much for having me here. Lord Hastings, what a life, lived, committed to serving humanity, and it's just absolutely inspirational. My question is centered around the issue of citizenship and leadership, and I gravitate towards that. And I love the way you speak about it, because it is an area which I want to say I literally wandered into accidentally in my life, as we ended up starting a citizens movement in Zimbabwe that was instrumental in helping our nation move a few inches forward. And that meant that under Robert Mugabe, we had to spend some time in prisons as young men and women speaking truth to power. I want to ask you a question about leadership for Africa and eventually global leadership, sir. When you look at the current crop of leaders that are coming up, the next wave, I mean, you come from a cohort of leaders that have done incredible things globally. You spoke about meeting Nelson Mandela. There's few people that can speak about that. When you look at the next wave, or what you see as the next wave, is there a sense of hope, or is there a sense of concern? And whichever way that goes, the add-on question would be, if you had 100 of these leaders that you knew for a fact were going to step up into national or global leadership, what would be the one thing that you would say, young men, young women, I need you to get this, and I need you to get it in abundance, because this is absolutely critical for where this world is going. And without it, or with it, you guys will do amazing things. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure you know that I'm very committed to Zimbabwe as the chairman of the Council of ZANE, which stands for Zimbabwe National Emergency. And I was in Zimbabwe in March, just before we were not allowed to travel, but visiting our work there. So Zimbabwe is beating on my heart all the time. Yes, I am very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. I'm hopeful and positive. I really believe in the young leaders of the future, and I spend a lot of time investing in them. And I'm on the board of One Young World, one of the great organizations which brings young leaders together on an annual basis to explore. It's a youth Davos, essentially. Obviously, this year we've not been able to do it, but we're planning to do it next year. And we have usually around 2,000 young professionals who come together in different locations around the world, very committed to tomorrow's leaders of the future. But so here's the one thing I do say to them. And I say to them this, and because when I think about the African story and some of the key figures who here in this country had to fight for the end of slavery, one of whom, of course, was William Wilberforce, who chose to become a politician in the British Parliament at the age of 20 and gave the next 44 years of his life to the battle to bring about two major drafts of legislation to see the end of the African slavery movement in the UK, and then died 3 days later. I say to them all, be patient, purposeful, determined, stick to the course of fighting for the thing that will bring dignity and freedom, because the tendency of today is to rush everything in cycles of short demand and to go with the observing clicks and ticks of your friends. None of that counts in the long cycle of the great arc, as Martin Luther King said, where history must bend towards justice. Look at the time it's taken for his dream to come true, even in parts. So I say to them, don't do this because this is going to make you feel good and get your friends to like you. Do this because you have justice beating inside your inner being. Your DNA is made up of anguish and anger and fury and peacemaking. And they find that tough because it doesn't mean being popular, but it is how we need to live.
That's just, it's so profound. I just feel we should have several moments of pause just to contemplate that. And I know no one knows the truth of what you said more than Pastor Evan. Pastor Evan, you're still muted. I don't know if you wanted to say anything in response.
Well, I mean, it's hearing you say that with the kind of conviction of a man who has lived it out is absolutely essential. And I guess when we look around in our own sphere of young generation of leaders, our concern is exactly what you say, that we are gravitating more towards the popular than the purposeful. that we would rather have more clicks and views and likes on our pictures than we would, devote ourselves to working slowly towards a cause and towards a purpose. And I want to thank you for articulating that. It would be awesome to see men and women from your cohort grace more and more platforms where young people are, and spend these glorious years that you have just pumping more and more into them, because we desperately need, and especially when I look at Africa, desperately need to change the way we lead on that continent. And thank you for the work you do with Zaid, by the way.
I just want to point you to the Young Africa Leaders Initiative, which YALI, which is a phenomenal program centered around Johannesburg, but drawing in young leaders from all over the continent. And of course, the Africa Leadership Academy in Pretoria, which I've been to many times, and I support the group here in the UK. And you do see some, there's also the Africa Leadership University, and I'm a governor of the M-Pesa Academy in Nairobi, and I look at our 900 children and I just see great themes and prospects of the future.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. And just in the last minutes, we have time for one more person in our audience, Jacob. But I just want to say, I do see there is one question. I'll just flag this from the audience here, just because we never get to the audience, and I'll just do it this time. This is from Tunde, who says, what is the Lord's framework or secret for building successful relationships and partnerships? I think you've partly answered that, but perhaps you might want to just...
The only thing I'd add is that relationships are about us choosing to love and respect a person, irrespective of title, position, opportunity, finance, whatever. I just really believe, I never Google people before I meet them, because I think it's just important to just see somebody as they are. And and engage in a conversation of value. I know one of my very, very, very precious friends who is in his early 80s, and he and I met when I was 18 and he was 30, and we remained deeply precious. I'm 62 now, he's 82 now. That tells you how long we've been at the journey of friendship. You take the long journey of walking together in order to do what is required: justice, mercy, honor, dignity.
Thank you. Let's close it out with Jacob. Cory, let's have your input. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, thank you so much for hosting such an insightful conversation. Yeah, I've had the privilege of joining Michael for dinner this evening. So I'm literally sat across the room with him. But yeah, just Michael's someone who's been a mentor for myself. Been someone who's had a big role in different parts of my career, and just more so as a friend as well. Someone who I've been able to seek personal sort of counsel and advice for. So yeah, I guess my question directed to Michael is just based on what we're currently seeing in the UK surrounding youth unemployment. So we know that youth unemployment is expected to rise to about 17% in the UK. And in conjunction with that, we're seeing youth unemployment in BAME communities, and by BAME I mean Black and ethnic minority communities, rise as well in a disproportionate amount, because we see a lot of young BAME people in professions that are traditionally sort of lockdown industries, such as your restaurants and your hotel chains. So I guess my question is, how can we as a community support young Black people essentially to make sure this trend doesn't continue and negatively affect the BAME community?
Well, Jacob, that is a charged challenge to, I think, three categories of organizations and individuals. Number one, during the period of, for many countries, certainly for the United States and for the UK and many others, during this period of lockdown, of restraint on things like restaurants and hotels and people working in what many would see as the sort of standard jobs, many companies like Zoom and Google and Microsoft and Tesla and you name it, including the retail outlets, have thrived. Technology companies and their stocks have gone through the roof. And retail outlets that have remained open, and pharmacies and medical institutions have thrived. And whoever is producing PPE has made more money that's hospital-wearing clothing for protection than ever before. So I really believe there's a duty that falls on all these thriving organizations, the Amazons of the world, the distributors of the world, to really make up the gap, to be willing to take that hit on profits, to absorb people, and to help people to find work that is going to contain them during this period when we go back into economic renewal, we hope, in the course of the next 1 to 2 years. So that's a duty on companies, a challenge to companies. Secondly, I think there is a real duty on governments, which must be to look hard at the kind of expenditures that we make where we can release much more money, not just to hold people through a period of unemployment, but rather to focus resources that people need during unemployment on innovation and entrepreneurship. We can gift people thousands, whether it's dollars or pounds, just to stay at home, or we can help them to organize, to be involved in that creative entrepreneurial innovation, which is going to set them free in the business. And we just need to have that kind of determined thinking of drawing in the best of the companies who do it well, and the innovators who do it well with the people who need it. And then the third area is, that's, Jacob, where we need one another. You know, it is a truism to say, sadly, that far too many, it is said of us in the Black world, here in the UK and in the US, that we don't trust each other enough. Because we don't trust each other enough, we're not keen to put our resources together. And other cultures do that. And they put their resources together to acquire property and to invest in small businesses and to back their students to go to university without hefty loans and to secure the potential of someone's future. Well, we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to make a choice to say, it's not about us fighting against the wider world beyond it. And it's about us loving one another and choosing to put our resources into common space where we can. And we should choose to do that. And there are many young men and women that I put little bits of seed money here, there, in the next place to enable them to build a future for themselves. Well, it's important, if we have it, to make it available. And I know that comes as a challenge to many. You'll be thinking, I've got to hold myself together during what might be a tough time. Well, frankly, if we're eating well, we've got air and water, let's be grateful and draw others in and support them.
Jacob, thank you so much. And Michael, thank you for choosing to spend your Friday evening with us and just being a blessing in terms of what you have shared with us and what you have highlighted today. Thank you for all those who joined us for questions. And above all, equally, thank you to all of those in the audience who have joined us and just made this such a special event. So we'll have Elizabeth close things out, and we're looking forward to our next guest. I'll just quickly say Elizabeth will tell you about our November guest, and then we have Senator Cory Booker to close out the year in December. Hopefully we'll be in a good place in December. But again, thank you, Lord Hastings, so much. This has been such a privilege. And just leave the last few words to Elizabeth. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Lord Hastings, for your incredibly wise words. It's been a real honor to hear the two of you speak for this past hour. I do want to tell everyone about our next upcoming guest, who's Claudia Rankin, poet, essayist, and playwright, and she has a new book that's just come out called Just Us, An American Conversation, and we're thrilled that she will be in conversation with Sarah on Friday, November 13th at the same time. So please join us. I put a link to the program in the chat. I also would like to thank once again Peggy Woodford Forbes for her support of conversations across the diaspora. And we would love to have other supporters if anybody out there is interested. If you are able to support MOAD at this time, we would certainly accept any size of donation. You can text a donation to MOAD by texting the number 56512 and type the word MOAD SF and follow the link to make a donation. You can also go to our website and type MOAD SF www.lobbyist.org/donate, and that will take you to our donation page. We really are staying afloat throughout this pandemic because of viewers like you. So please take a moment to support the programming that we're doing. And we also want to hear back from you. We want to hear your feedback on the program. So I've put a link to a survey in the chat. You can also take a picture of this QR code that's on the screen right now, and it will pull up the survey. It should also pop up on your computer when you close the Zoom window. So we're trying in every way possible to get this survey to you. So we would love for you to fill it out. But mostly I want to, again, thank Sarah and Lord Hastings for giving us their time today and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.